Right, so I'm a faculty member at the University of Missouri in Animal Sciences, and I work on dairy cow fertility. So dairy cows they're difficult to get pregnant, but it's really important that they do get pregnant, because in order for them to make milk, they have to have a calf, and after they have a calf, then we can start milking them. But the first step is for them to become pregnant. And the reason they're difficult to get pregnant is because when they make a lot of milk, they tend to lose some weight when they're making all this milk, and that really makes it difficult. So there's a lot of science that goes around understanding, why don't they get pregnant, and how can we do some things to help them get pregnant. And so that's what we work on. It's really a global thing, so I travel throughout the world talking about this subject to lots of different people. And like last year I was in 6 continents. The only place I didn't give a talk was Antarctica, because I don't think there's any cows in Antarctica. But other than that, you pretty much travel the world, because it's kind of a global thing. So my typical day is I have a lab. We do laboratory work, and I have graduate students that I work with, and then I also teach classes. And so mainly I'm either teaching or working with my graduate students, or designing research projects, and writing papers. So that's what I typically do.
Okay. So what inspired you to become a scientist?
Right, so interesting question. How do you get into this business?
Right.
So first of all, I grew up in New York State, and New York State's a very big dairy state. About the 3rd or 4th largest population of dairy cows are found in New York State. And I grew up in upstate New York. So I did not come from a dairy farm. Mm-hmm. I lived in town, but in my area there was a lot of dairy cows, and so you just grow up around them. And we used to always go to the New York State Fair and look at the cows. And I just liked the way they looked. I liked the way they smelled. I just liked them. I don't know, I can't describe it. I just always liked them. These things were really interesting. And so when I went to college, I went to Cornell University. The reason I went to Cornell is because it's an agricultural school, and it was my family didn't have a lot of money, and it was a state school, so it was fairly inexpensive. And I went into animal science. And when I got there, so animal science, you study things like dairy cows. And when I got there, I was on what's called a work-study program, which means you work and you make money to pay your bills. And I went to see my academic advisor as a freshman, and he said to me, "I see you are work study." And I said, "Yes." And he said, "What are you going to do with your work study?" And I said, "I'm going to go to the dining hall and I'm going to wash dishes." And he says, "Would you like to work in a lab?" And I said, "I don't know." He says, "Well, my wife has a job open in the lab. Do you want to go see her?" And I said, "Okay, I'll go talk to her." And I started working in a lab. And really, the first 2 years, I just washed dishes in a lab instead of washing dishes in the dining hall, but I was in a lab. And then that eventually led into a lot of undergraduate research. And that lab was actually in plant pathology, so it was actually in plants. But at the same time, I had this real interest in dairy cows, and so I started milking cows at a farm near the university, not at the university farm, but I just started milking cows. And so I was milking cows before class, after class, over the summers. I milked a lot of cows. And then when I got my BS, it was kind of obvious that I had all this experience in research, but I had this real love of cows.
Right.
so these things kind of came together, and I went to graduate school.
Okay. So how did you balance the work and the school life?
You just work hard. It wasn't that much of a problem. I didn't have the best grades in the world. I had good grades, B+ type of student. But I loved being in the lab, so typically what I would do is in between classes I would go to the lab. Worked every day in the lab, and I would go in between classes. So if I had a couple hours, I'd go to the lab, and then I'd milk cows before school and after school and just fit in homework. But I never recall feeling overly worked or overly stressed by it, probably because I was doing things that I like. It's really important to figure out what you like to do and do what you like, and that's so important in science. It's just, and it's not really a job then. It's just, I just like doing these things. And I do wish, though, although I was about a B+ student, I do wish I was a better student, because I think that that preparation you get as an undergraduate is very important, particularly in the basic sciences. I mean, anything that an undergraduate can do to get skilled in the basic sciences, the chemistry, the math, the biology, the cell biology, microbiology, genetics, that sort of stuff is very useful as you go on. And even now, I'm 56. I was in college when I was in my 20s, and there are classes I, to this day, regret I didn't do better in, okay? Because the information is just not with me, and it's, so just something to think about.
So all through that, did you have any mentors?
Yeah, well, the lab I worked in was tremendous, because there were graduate students, and there was technicians and postdocs, and it was a different laboratory experience than is often experienced by undergraduates. So my experience today is oftentimes we bring kids in for the summer, and we have an experiment that we want them to do, and they have to complete it in 8 weeks, and it's a very intensive, get them trained, get them do it, analyze the data, make a poster, send them home type experience. And in this case, I was labor. So I washed dishes, I made media, I cultured things, and then eventually, by the time I was a senior, then we did independent research, and for a full year, and we actually published a paper. But it was, for the most part, I was simply labor. The grad students would say, do this, and I would do it, but they would also, it wasn't just I was following a cookbook. I really understood what I was doing. So I was given a lot of responsibilities in the lab. And I think from my own perspective, one recommendation I would have for undergraduates is that, or that are interested, is that you have to really hang in there. And there might be a year where you were washing dishes and taking out the trash, but you have to hang in there, because most of the time faculty members they're kind of watching you and say, okay, is this person really committed? Are they committed to the goals of the laboratory? And if they're committed to the goals of the laboratory, they'll do anything that needs being done. If the trash needs to go out, somebody needs to take it out. And if I'm the faculty member, I think you should, maybe you should take the trash out. And that's what I found. I mean, I didn't have any agenda whatsoever. I just kind of liked being there, and I enjoyed the people I was with. Now, if it had been an unfriendly environment, I would have left. It was a very friendly environment. I mean, I learned from an early age that science is supposed to be fun. You're supposed to laugh. You're supposed to, you always want to walk into the lab and be happy you're there. Now that doesn't mean you're going to have always easy days, but that's what I would think.
Okay. So what was your reaction towards failure or conflict? How did you deal with it?
Right. Yeah. So you're going to fail in science, and you have to get used to it. And you're gonna have experiments that don't work,
Exactly.
and they have to be redone. You're gonna have lots and lots of grants that get rejected. Only 10% of grants are typically funded, so you have to get used to rejection. You are going to have papers that get rejected, and you have to get used to that. And if you can't handle rejection, it can be very difficult. One of the way you have to react to it is anytime you face adversity. Let's just take a grant application is rejected. You're first going to be angry because you spent so much time working on it. And I always tell people, the day you no longer get angry when you get a rejection, you need to get out of science, because it needs to make you mad. Because if it makes you mad, that shows you care. If you're like, oh well, I got rejected, oh well, I'm gonna go play basketball now, whatever, not good. You need to be mad, okay. And then after you get over that, you need to look at the reasons why, and you need to look at the reviews, and you need to try to make it better. I mean, you have no other option.
Right.
You can either try to make it better, or you can quit. And if you quit, what's going to happen if you quit. You're not going to get the grant. Now, if I make it better, I might get the grant. But if I quit, I've already determined the end result. Okay, so in general, you need to pick yourself up and pull yourself together, and allow yourself to be angry. But and then you need to figure out what the problem was and try to make it better. And you have to accept the fact that you have to eat a little humble pie once in a while and realize that your brilliant idea isn't so brilliant. And so I think that's really important. In my career, I had one major setback. I got my BS, I got my master's, then I went to North Carolina State to do a PhD, and I eventually left graduate school because it wasn't the right laboratory for me. And I left, and at that point I wanted to quit science altogether. And I was working in construction. I was done. I was working in construction, and I just had this moment one afternoon on a Friday afternoon, and I was out on a road. I was doing road work that day, and we were doing road work, and the cars were going by me at 55 miles an hour, and I was on the road, and it was very dangerous. And not that I was doing anything dangerous, it's just dangerous. Road work is dangerous with cars on a highway. And it just came to me. I said, this is not going to be me.
Right.
This is not going to be my life. This is not who I am. I didn't go to Cornell, and I didn't go to Kansas State, and I didn't go to high school in Cornell and Kansas State, and my parents and my professors and everybody invested all this so that I can, work on a high road crew. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with working on a road crew, but that wasn't what my life was meant to be, And I quit, and I got a job at Ciba-Geigy, which was a biotech company, and then I went to University of Florida, and I started up again, and best thing I ever did was to just realize that, when you get knocked back, you need to get up, and start again.
Okay. So what recommendations do you have for graduate students and undergraduate students pursuing a career in your field?
Right, and specifically in sort of dairy science or animal science?
Yes.
Yes, okay, so first of all, I know the first of all is work as hard as possible in your classes. Try to do a good job. Try to make sure you have some good foundational knowledge, because it's very handy. And all that basic knowledge is important. The mathematics is important. All that stuff's important. Do the best you can. That doesn't mean you have to have a 4.0 grade point average. But you need to try. You need to try, because science, you need to have a certain amount of information in your head to be a good scientist, and you can't find everything on your cell phone. I mean, you have to have some information in your head. So that's the first thing. Second of all, I think for my students in dairy science, it helps if they have a little bit of experience with dairy cows. In other words, they've maybe had some practical experience. We're a very applied science, and so one of our tasks is to try to help people get their cows pregnant. And so it helps if they've had some experience on a farm, so they know. Okay, so this is how a farm works, and that's important to understand that, because I find if the students haven't had that experience, inevitably they can't connect with their projects really well. They don't understand what the concerns of the farmers are because they've never been on a farm. So I'd like to have a little bit of experience. And then I think the third thing is you need to be curious. I mean, you need to wonder why, and you need to be curious about lots of questions in science. And so I've always been kind of a curious person. I was really interested in stuff, and now I'm more curious than I've ever been. And so I read a lot of scientific literature. I don't just read dairy cow literature. I read all sorts of stuff, you know. And I read about landings on Mars. I read about human disease. I read about malaria. I read about, you know, science in China. I read about everything. Okay, and, you know, I read about global warming. I read about penguins. I read about anything, because you just got to be curious. And so I think if you've got those attributes, if you got some decent scientific knowledge, if you got some experience, if you're really curious, you know, and then finally, I think you got to work hard. It's a lot of work. You know, if you don't like to work hard, it's a lot. You got to put in a lot of hours.
Okay. So, thanks again for taking time to be with us. That's all we have today.
Okay, fantastic.
And just thank you for your time.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much.